Today is July 25th, 2007. I'm Hilda Doherty. I am interviewing Warren Blaylock about his World War II experiences. Mr. Blaylock, I'd like you to tell me your full name, please.
Warren Darrell Blaylock.
And I would like to know when you were born and where.
I was born January the 9th, 1921, north of Alma, where Dean's Furniture Store is located now. There's a little log cabin there that had a one-room lean-to on it, I understand.
Who built that little log cabin?
I don't know. It was on a farm owned by Mr. and Miss Douglas. My mother and dad were sharecroppers that year when I was born, and they were sharecroppers with the Douglas family. And that's where the Warren came in. After I was born, Mrs. Douglas, who was Republican, came down to see me, and she'd always say, "Well, how's little Warren today?" Warren G. Harding, president, was a Republican. And so the name Warren just kind of stuck with me then all my life. It was never just an outright named, I
guess. Well, who were your parents?
My father was D.H., and his name was Doc, D-O-C-K, Doc Blaylock, and my mother was Edna Bennett, was her maiden name, and her father was Charles Bennett, and her mother was Clora Blevins, I believe. My grandparents came from Georgia and homesteaded down where today is Eagle Crest, the golf course.
Is that right?
They homesteaded there, my grandfather with a horse and one oxen. And I've visited many times up on the hill there where Eagle Crest is today.
Do you have any family stories about how they came here? Was it by river or by
My grandfather came by boat when he was 7 years old, and he was an orphan and lived with some of his relatives. And then in latter years, why he homesteaded the land there and married my grandmother, Clora Blevins.
Do you have a date of when he came to Arkansas?
No,
when he would have been 7?
No,
that would have been very early.
Old. Been a long time ago.
Very early in our
Yes.
history.
If the land was available to be homesteaded, it had to be a number of years ago.
Very early. I would like to know then, did you live in that log cabin and in that area on that farm very long, or where did you move?
Probably about a year, and my parents moved to a larger farm where it's now near Highway 71, closer into Alma, with the thought in mind that when I got to be 6, 7 years old, I'd go to school in Alma. But I didn't. I walked and went to school in Fine Springs. There was a grade school at Fine Springs. Mr. Labe Dean from the Dean Springs community was my teacher. Later on, then we moved from where we were over to Dean Springs. My father became a livestock dealer for the rest of his life, and he was dealing in livestock, horses, cows, mules, and all kind of animals.
So he must have had a good eye for stock.
He did. He had a real good eye. It challenged him to always guess the weight of an animal and see how far off he was one way or the other. And,
were there stories about the people that tried to cheat him?
They tried to what?
Cheat him? Did he have stories about people that tried to cheat him?
It would be what he would see going on with other people, especially with widows, that he would see people trying to buy their livestock or buy their machinery or their horses or something, and he'd come home quite unhappy at times, how people would be taking advantage of the widow who didn't know anything about the prices.
That's
true.
true.
I admired him for this, that he was concerned for the welfare of other people.
Livestock was a large part of the livelihood of the people in that time.
It sure was. He traveled in a truck, and he had a route that he traveled in Winslow, Mountainburg, Mulberry, Locke, Fern, and all those communities. And everybody was, at that time, people up in the mountain made their living by making railroad ties. And they'd make them during the week with an axe and saw. And then on Saturday, they'd take them into Winslow to sell them, there would be a man there from the railroad company buying railroad ties. And they would buy, they would sell the railroad ties and take the money to buy their groceries and go back home with it then for another week. And I have seen my father many times, he would buy a horse or a mule, a team of mules, something from a man up there in a wagon, and just leave the wagon sitting there. And the man would come get it sometime during the following week.
Did you have other brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have two brothers, no sisters. Two brothers younger than I am. One is Ronald Wesley Blaylock. He's 6 years younger than I am. And then I have Russell Wayne Blaylock, who is 17 years younger than I am. He has, after he finished college and taught school a little, then he had his own business, Artist Point, north of Mountainburg.
That's nice. Did you go to school at the Pine Springs school for several years?
I was probably in the 3rd grade when we moved from where we were to Dean Springs, and then I started the Dean Springs school.
Oh, I see.
That school, Dean Springs, and I'm not sure about but Dean Springs had been a high school until it was consolidated latter years, so that everyone from 7th grade and above went to Alma when they started having school buses. Rudy and Dyer and Graphic and all those places. Anyone in the 7th grade or older would ride a bus and go to Alma. They still had the elementary school there in the same location.
Had it consolidated before you got to 7th grade? Did you go to high school?
Yes, I went. I was probably in the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, walking, going to Dean Springs. Everybody walked then to school, and then when I got in the 7th grade, I rode the bus and went to Alma then to school.
Did you hear 7th grade? You would have been about. What would have that have been about in the 30s? It would have been. I'm trying to think when the war rumblings started.
I graduated from high school in 1938.
38, okay.
And
so it was a long time before the war.
Yes.
What I'm leading up to is, I want to know if you heard in your school studies or on the radio, newspapers perhaps, about the trouble they were having in Europe before it actually broke into war.
No, I did not know anything about it. The communication was very limited. We had radios, before we didn't have electricity for a long time, or running water, and so we didn't have a radio or any way of communicating other than the Kansas City Star came every Thursday. It was a newspaper, and it always had a continued story going on all the time, and I read the continued story, and that's about my...
So you enjoyed school and reading?
Oh, very much, very much. I enjoyed reading, and I like to read today. That's my pastime.
As you were in those grade school years, who was the person that became your model? Who was the main person that influenced your love of school, your love of reading, that kind of thing?
When I was going to Alma, I stayed with an uncle in Alma in the 2nd grade, and my teacher there was a Mrs. Cravens, and she was a lovely lady that instilled the desire to read. And then as I went to school in Dean Springs, where there were two teachers, Mr. Sidney Crawford and his wife, who lived in the Kibra community, were the two teachers up there, and they, shall I say, invited me into the reading field.
How did they divide the school between the two of them? How did they divide the classes?
He had the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, and she had the smaller children, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. I think a woman maybe related, or they related to a mother figure better than to a man.
That's quite different to classrooms today, that they would have had 3 grades
Each
to instruct
teacher,
at one time.
At one time, and two, you were in the same room with the. If you were in the 3rd grade, you were in the same room with the 5th grade or 6th grade, and you'd hear them reciting or reading or working arithmetic on the blackboard, even though you were not in that class.
It actually sharpened your mental.
It did. It did.
Well, you graduated high school at Alma in 1938.
Yes.
Did you find work at that time, or did you continue studying?
Um, I helped my father some with his livestock, and then later in the summer I went to work at the Alma Inn for Mr. Henry Weiss, and he had a restaurant, drive-in with a motel in the back of, circled in the back of it. And I lived in one of the rooms of the motel, and worked from 11 o'clock in the morning until 1 o'clock at night. It was 14 hours a day, and I made $7 a day in my room and board. I know, $7 a week in my room and board.
And you considered that pretty good?
Yes, I did. I saved $5 a week so I could get a car at some later time, which my mother and dad purchased a car for me then so I could go home on my time off and take my laundry home. And my first car cost $125. Should have bought you a picture of that. $125. It was a two-door coupe that the doors opened in front, not in the back like they do now. They open in front. Those are called suicide doors, because if one of them opened, you were going down the road, you pretty well committed suicide.
Oh dear.
Yes. I borrowed the money from my mother and dad and paid them back $5 a week, and I had $125 paid out. And then I went over to Sears and bought my first item on time or on credit card, and I bought a radio for the car. It was $25.
Oh boy.
And it was to be paid out like $5 a month, I believe. And I said, if I ever get this paid out, I'll never buy anything else on time, and they'll charge anything. And so today, I still do not use credit cards unless it's a necessity.
You learned your lesson right early.
I sure did.
Where was that motel or system located that you worked in?
It's right where Kitty College is now.
Oh,
If you know where Kitty College is, right at the north end of, we say Main Street. Actually, it's Fayetteville Avenue.
Yes.
It's right at the end of Main Street there.
I didn't realize that was there. So how long did you get to work there?
Well, I worked there until I went into the Army. Let's see, no, I worked there for 2 years, and then I had a friend who, there in Alma, who was working at Camp Chaffee, at Fort Chaffee, had just began to work out there, and he said there was an opening with the surveying crew. And so I went over and applied with Black and Veatch, V-E-A-T-C-H, and worked with the surveying crew out surveying the outside boundary lines of Fort Chaffee all the way around, setting concrete blocks that markers that every time there was a curve, or we could set a marker, or set it every half mile if it was just a straight line. We'd make up the concrete markers of the morning and then set them in the afternoon, the ones we had made the day before after they'd seasoned out. And I worked there until the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. In fact, I was working there that day, another teenager and myself, and when we heard this, we said, oh boy, let's get close to us. And it wasn't long after that, maybe a couple of months, until my job was eliminated, and also I got a letter saying, we need you. Uncle Sam needs you, I believe is what they said.
The surveying was actually when Fort Chaffee was being built up at first,
yes,
very first.
First started, there were no buildings or anything out there to begin with, and so there were contractors there building the barracks and all those things, water lines, sewer lines, and so. But with the 3 of us that were working together, we were surveying the outside boundary line of the fort all the way around down to Charleston, across the Greenwood, and back up toward Van Buren.
That was quite an undertaking.
Yes, it was. But it was easy. We were easy in that we were outside, and I was an outside person, having lived on the farm, and just enjoyed the work. As I worked out there, and there were 2 men who asked if they could ride with me to Fort Smith. Now that was before we had the lock and dam, and so you had to go to Fort Smith from Alma, and then turn and come back down. And they were working at the stockyards at Fort Smith, and they lived about 2 miles beyond where I did at Dean Springs, and they would walk and be at my house in the morning about 6:30 or 7 o'clock. And then I would take them to the Fort Smith, the Arkansas River Bridge, and let them out. They'd walk on over to the stockyard then. And they gave me 25 cents a day. And that was enough to pay gas, but the gas was 20 cents a gallon then, like everything else was cheaper. But, and I'd go back by there and pick them up at the end of the bridge. They'd walk back to the end of the bridge. There was a difference then and there is now. Today, if you have a friend with you, you'll take him home. I know as a teenager I would be dating and I'd go up to Dean's Market. It just started and they had a pickup truck and 2 twin boys, 2 twin girls. And so one of the boys would want to get the truck. And so when we got back from a date at night, if it was 11 or 12 o'clock, he didn't take me home, which was just a mile down the road. We stopped there and I got out and walked on no way. Walking was a way of life.
Yes, it was.
And it was good for us. It was good for us.
Well, sure it was.
Didn't have to go to the spa and do any of those things.
Tell me about the day you were working out on the survey crew and heard the news about Pearl Harbor. Tell me exactly what you were doing and what it struck in your mind, how it stuck.
I was not as familiar with geography, with the world and the nations and the political time in 1938 as we are today here in 2007. And today we're much closer related to everybody. At that time, whatever happened was so far away, you didn't really pay much attention to it. But on this particular, well, when the war started, several people, young men, joined, they volunteered. And then the draft came along. And when they had the draft, I didn't want to go. No one really wanted to go. And so I went to Fayetteville and tried to get into the Coast Guard there. And then they gave me a ticket to Little Rock. Went to Little Rock, got turned down on physical there, and came back to Alma. And then by that time I'd gotten my draft notice to report, so no one else was interested in you if you're in the rank cert, if you report for your draft. So we did. And when I was examined by the Army doctor and commented where I'd been turned down on the other item, he said that could be taken care of with a real sharp knife. And if I were you, I wouldn't say anything about it anymore. And I didn't. But,
when you were out there on that survey crew and working on Fort Chaffee, did you wonder why they were building that?
No, I mean, we knew the war was going on over in Europe, and we'd get it in the Kansas City Star, and I know I had an uncle who lived in Kansas City, and from time to time he would send to his brother-in-law who lived nearby, would send him a stack of newspapers he'd accumulated over like 3 or 4 weeks, and we would read those and find out what was going on.
So you did know why they were building Fort Chaffee?
Yes, sure it did. And seeing by 1938, by that time we had electricity, REA, rural electrification, and we had electricity, so we could have lights, and then that in turn then gave us water because we could have a pump in the well where we had been drawing it out of the well. We'd have a pump in the well and have a bathroom in the house. So it was, we thought, modern.
Yeah. Well, do you actually remember when electricity came to your family's house?
About 34, I believe, 34, 35. I'm thinking because that was right after the Depression. And I know that during that time I studied at home on the kitchen table with a, well, we had an Aladdin lamp. That was really uptown. We have an Aladdin lamp rather than just have a kerosene lamp.
Yes, it was.
And, so I remember we went to that route until we had the electricity.
Now let's go back to that famous letter. Uncle Sam wants you. Where did he decide that he wanted you?
Well, he wanted me in Van Buren, and then I rode my train for the first time to Little Rock, where we had our physical exams and sworn into the Army, and then we had 2 weeks in which to come back home and take care of any loose ends we might have, or
say your goodbyes.
yes, or any jobs that we wanted to close down or something of that nature.
Then tell us where they did send you for basic training.
we were in, there were 30 of us from Crawford County, went on the train all together, and we knew some of them that were on the train that were with us. I knew Clovis Bryant, who was a state representative later on, a senator, after the war was over and came back. And there was Howard Mitchell, who lived here in Van Buren. His wife was a nurse and worked for Dr. Savers, I believe, here in Van Buren. And then he went into the Navy, but when we, at some point along the way, we would get in contact with each other. We would meet somewhere halfway on a weekend or something like that. But we went to from Fort Robinson, Camp Robinson, Joe T. Robinson, Little Rock. We stayed there 5 days, and then they, at the end of 5 days, late in the afternoon, they told us all to set our barracks bags outside with all our clothing and everything in it, and then marched down to the railroad, and we all got on Pullman cars, and then we could see our bags being loaded on, so we were know we were going somewhere. They didn't tell us where. So that was a big item of conjecture among us as to where we were going, what we were going to be doing. And that first night we slept in, as I said, I'd never been on a train before, and it came from Little Rock, from Van Buren to Little Rock. And that was after the 2 weeks were up, and then we went back, and then we got on the train after 5 days and started some direction, and we didn't know where. The train would back up and then go forward and then back up and switch around about all night. And so we were bedded down in our bunks. And the next day, I had to laugh at my friend Clovis Bryant. He didn't know who the fellow was who slept with him in his bunk, but he said he believed he had lice. And he Clovis either paid the man to move to some other bunk with somebody, or he traded somebody else with him. So we were on the train for about 5 days, and so you want to be with somebody you knew. And every time we go through a town, we'd want to know what that town was, where we're going through Oklahoma, Arizona, but we seemed to be going northeast all the time. We figured it out, we were going northeast. And in the daytime, lots of people, boys played poker for matches and things of that nature. And when we finally woke up one morning, the train had stopped, sitting still. And we looked out and hollered at somebody and asked him where we were, what the town was. And we were at Fort Rodman, Massachusetts.
That's a long ways
Oh,
off.
it was just about 4 days that we traveled there, eating and sleeping and not knowing where we were going. So we went to Fort Rodman, which was a small 40-acre fort, an old fort, been there, I think, from the Civil War days, but it was just 40 acres, and it was right on the ocean. We had one side was a seashore, the other side had a chain link fence around it, so you weren't going to leave either way we wanted to. And
Did all 30 of you from Crawford County make it there?
All 30 of us made it there. But while we were there going through basic training, 2 or 3 were sent back home for physical ailments. One was Mr. Hopkins' son-in-law, J.T. Cox, and he had a motor company. And he did good. He came back because of physical, and then he did good work for himself and with his motor company, because he couldn't buy any new cars, he couldn't buy tires or anything.
That's right. So
trading in used cars or what they did good enough. Pleased for him. And another man who came back was from Mountainburg, Joe Friddle. And he came back and later on went to work for the government as a food inspector. He worked here in Van Buren for OK Processors and other processing plants here.
Do you recall any of that?
It wound up, there were 25 of us who went. One of them was Charlie Moss, who was the superintendent of schools in Alma. He was in charge of us on our way up there. And then he was sent to a different organization, and he wound up over in the Pacific. And he spent his time over in the Pacific. And whereas we went to the European theater.
Did, can you recall the others who were sent back to Van Buren, Crawford County, who didn't get to stay with your group? You said J.T. Cox and Joe Friddle. Would there have been another one or two?
Yes, there was one more I remember that was sent back home. I cannot remember his name, but I do remember his wife. Her maiden name was Lawrence. That's her maiden name, and her first name, I can't remember.
Well, that's okay. I just wondered if you might recall them, if you thought of it.
That's a young lady named Lawrence.
But that's
And
an
the rest
interesting.
of us, then, which was about 25, then we became the cadre to start a new mobile hospital. And so we went to medical schools while we were there. We'd be gone for 30 days in addition to doing our drilling and so forth, that for physical strength. And then we had classes there on everything related to the injuries of various kinds, and because we were going to be right in the front lines. We were not the first aid people. That was another group, but we were going to be in a hospital unit that operated in tents all the time, unless as we moved from one battlefield to another, we would find a school building or a gymnasium or something like that we would use that to set up our tents. But we became proficient with our tents. We could set them up in 30 minutes and be ready to receive patients and operate on people if we actually got into combat if we needed to. So we spent 6 or 8 months there at A.P. Hill, Virginia. When we left Fort Rodman, we came then down to A.P. Hill, Virginia. And
Is A.P. the name of a town? A.P. Hill?
No, that was the name of a general. The general's name was
see.
A and a P initials.
Okay.
And his last name was Hill. And this place was named after him.
Yeah.
There were no permanent buildings there. Everything was in tents. And it was a large, there's large acreage to it, probably several thousand acres there. But it was used for us to become accustomed to working outside all the time. And we'd go on midnight bivouacs and drills and things. One night we went out in the forest to set up our hospital, someplace we'd never been, and it was dark out there. We did not have any lights. We had to know where everything went. Everybody had their own assigned job. And then after that, at about midnight, then we went on a hike through the woods. And we just scattered out. We weren't all to drill everything. Kind of scared coming. And I came to a big log lying in front of me. And then, so I hopped up on this big log and jumped off on the other side. There was no other side.
Oh.
It was at the edge of a bluff, and I landed in a treetop down below the bluff.
Oh.
And so I spent some time in the hospital, and then got back in and going again, and with all my other comrades that I knew. We'd get to press Argus and trade it around. And one of the boys was from Kibler. His name was Kibler, Leonard Kibler, and one from Graphic. His name was Grail. Winford Grail. And there's one from Oak Grove named Brownlee.
Those are interesting stories.
And then there was Clovis Bryant, which is from Van Buren.
What were you actually trained as yourself?
I was trained to begin with to be a non-commissioned officer in charge of the surgical division. Surgical division, we had a surgical division and a medical division. If someone gets sick, he'd go to the medical division, and if he had to have an operation, he'd go to the surgical division. But when we went into actual combat, the surgical division was 90% of what we were doing, and the medical part of it was when somebody had, well, we say a sore throat or appendicitis, or things of that nature.
Were they really able to prepare you for what it was going to be like?
I think so. I think so. It didn't bother me at all as far as working in the hospital and what we were doing. Let's back up a little bit. Am I going to be too long?
No, you continue. Take your liberty.
From AP Hill, we went to New York. And while we were in AP Hill, the doctors came in and joined our organization. And they were all officers. They were lieutenants or colonels or captains. And radiological people, laboratory people, and all avenues that you would need in a hospital. And also nurses came too. They were usually second lieutenants or first lieutenants. So they were away from the officers, and the nurses were separated, and they were all separated from us when they listed people. And they kept the segregation all the time. We went to New York, and we went loaded on the Queen Elizabeth, which was leased from the English government. And on this ship going across, there were 33,000 soldiers, counting officers.
33,000 military personnel.
Right. The one thing I remember about it, of course, all the staterooms are cleaned out, just the walls, and there were bunks from the bottom to the top, like 5 bunks, and they would just be solid. If one or two of you got up, they had to stay in their bunk. You couldn't get up and walk around or anything. There wasn't room. We had 2 meals a day, one at 9 o'clock and one at 4 o'clock, and the English furnished the meals. And I'll never again eat breaded tomatoes. The English liked it.
You had
and we had them twice a day for 7 days. But as I said, I'll never eat breaded tomatoes again. And we landed then in Scotland, and we, of course, 33,000. They all scattered and went different directions wherever they were consigned. I know that our outfit, which was the 67th Evacuation Hospital, we were all on the English cars, and they were small cars. You would have, at one end of the little car, you had 2 wheels. At the other end of the car, you had 2 wheels. And that was all. You just bumping up and down over all the rough places and everything. And the had wooden seats with a wooden back in it.
And what was a car to them? An automobile or a train or a bus?
Tram, I believe.
Tram,
okay.
Okay.
It was a bus.
Oh.
And so when we got on the plane, got on the train and started, we didn't know where we were going from there. We go through a town and the train would stop, and all the English people would come out, and they'd have big trays of donuts and all like that. Yummy, yummy, yummy. Hadn't had any donuts in so long, no cinnamon rolls in so long. Oh my goodness. None of them were made with sugar. Sugar was rationed over there, and they didn't have sugar to make it with. They had the dough, shape, and all like that. Didn't have any sugar on it.
Tastes like a biscuit?
That's what it was. Tastes like biscuits. Well, I was disappointed there, but being a farm boy back in Fort Robin, Massachusetts, I missed the fruit and vegetables that we had on the farm. And when we had our first opportunity to go to town, I went to town and bought myself a can of peaches and a can of half and half and a small cake. And I went back to the barracks and I gorged myself.
Peach sort cake,
Yeah.
straight from the south.
Right. And so, as I can say, you're missing Mom's cooking and all of the favorite things that we had. And
So from Scotland, they put you on the trams into England?
in Scotland, and went down through Scotland into England, and we came to a town called Dursley, D-U-R-S-L-E-Y. Dursley. It was a small town, had cobblestone streets, and the rationing had strained all the stores. Lots and lots of stores were closed. One would be open, and he'd have a big display, but it would be a display of empty boxes.
Oh.
You know, like it's clothing or whatever, just empty boxes displayed. The only thing we found that you might buy was fish and chips. That was just like McDonald's today, or
Yeah.
one of the fast food places. And we'd go down in the afternoon, in the evening before dark, and take a newspaper. You always had to bring your own newspaper, wrap it in, and everything. And they put your fish in there. They fried it. Put the fish in there. Put their French fries in with it, chips in with it. Roll it up in that paper and hand it to you. And you'd go back to the barracks and eat it or whatever you need to.
Fast food.
Started early there.
The only fast food.
Yes.
Well, that's quite a story. Did you set up a practice hospital in England, or did they?
Yes, and we did a lot of marching and drilling and school work. And we kept right on just like we were doing before, but we did it over there. And
can you give us a time frame on this? About what year we would have been in?
let's see, I believe June 6, 1944 was D-Day, I believe, if I remember right. It would be in the other piece, if you get my other piece together for the interview I had.
But it was before D-Day.
Oh, yes, it was before D-Day.
Did you have an idea what they were planning?
Oh, yes, we knew. If nothing else, we'd start a rumor, you know.
Liven it up a little?
Yes. And while we were there, we lived in empty buildings, store buildings or whatever they could find, because there were thousands and thousands and thousands, hundred thousands of troops over in England that they were accumulating. They just didn't have room for them unless you were in an empty building. I know one time we were in upstairs over a pub, and early in the evening you could hear people coming in down below to drink a beer or something down there. And the outside stairway we went up, and I think there were about 25 of us slept up there, anywhere we could find a place to put us. And we had a ration. We were given rations of I think once a week, I believe we got 2 Cokes in bottles, 2 Cokes, but there was no ice or anything. You just had to open and drink them hot. And cigarettes, even if you didn't smoke, you still got your cigarettes. Those came in handy. Cigarettes did after we got over in the European Theater. The people over there, you could trade them for souvenirs of different things, or some of the boys would trade them for cognac or wine or something of that nature. And
well, I'd like to know how your commanding officers kept control of their enlisted men when they were scattered all over a city, 25 here and 25 there.
There would be a sergeant in that, and yes, in there.
So you weren't exactly free.
You know, you weren't free to do what you want to do. There was lots of freedom at night, but then of course there were no lights, and you'd walk down the street. You kind of had to know where you were going. You couldn't have any light of any kind. And
what did you notice the mood of the people of England? The common working man, the lady on the street doing her shopping. What did you note from the people?
I didn't see any ladies doing shopping.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
There
just
was
wasn't
nothing?
anything to shop for. Because they had been in war, see, a lot longer than we had. They had, and everybody rode bicycles. Everybody. Once in a while, you might see a car. It'd be a government official or something, or an army vehicle, because all the gasoline was saved for the army vehicles. But everybody rode bicycles. And you could rent bicycles right out in the country on the weekend if you wanted to, or Sunday afternoon or something of that nature. This little town of Dursley had a woman who was a character of ill repute, and she, if you saw her in the daytime, she wore men's shoes and kind of ragged clothing or something of that nature. And she was out at night walking around, and those men's shoes would be squeaking, and you could hear her coming. And if you're walking down the street, 2 or 3 of you say, "I hear Molly coming, I hear Molly coming." We'd step back in the door. It was dark, until she went by. And it was, everybody had a
eerie kind
of tale to tell about Molly. That was in England, and then we knew we were getting close to D-Day just from the feel of things. And So, I think while I was in England, I went, I believe it was a sergeant when I left the United States. I went to staff sergeant's rank when I was in England, and then it was still a staff sergeant when I went into war. We were loaded on trains, and we went. We were traveling down to the seashore, and we stayed in the train like all day, waiting for a room to get in. So many people coming, you know, troops come from every direction, and we waited till it was our turn, and then we got on a landing ship, LCS. It was open, and it must have held 200 men, 250, 100 men in there, and the Coast Guard was operating this. We were getting ready, and we stayed in that for a day then.
American Coast Guard men?
And before we were turned loose to go. And then we just, well, the weather wasn't good while we were there either. It had two days or more. There was a real squall that came through, and you know, they postponed the invasion by one day. But
well, was there desperation among the boys to be closed in on those
no
craft and not allowed to?
No. Everybody was patriotic. They were going to do a job, and they knew the people back home were rationing for us and sending us letters. That was the biggest thing from the time I went in the Army until I got out. The mail called. Are you going to get a letter, postcard, just anything? And if nothing else, I did. I turned around. I wrote to a friend, a classmate of mine, and we corresponded. He had a disability and was not drafted, and so we corresponded. I'd tell him what was happening over there, and he'd tell me what was happening back here, and so it
kind of like a lifeline.
yes, kind of kept you in touch. And
Morale.
then we were getting the Press Argus, and actually we didn't know the seriousness of it. We found out as soon as we hit the beaches over there, and they dropped the whole front end of that landing craft down and said, "Boys, let's go." And we went out through that, but it was in water, and you were up to your waist in water there, and things kept bumping you, and you look down, and there's a soldier floating there, just all everywhere. You just push him out of the way. You get on up to the beach there, and so we got up on the beach, and supplies were stacked there, and then they came with our trucks in and came off to get on the runways that had been laid out there for them to get off. And
were you on the second day or the first day of the invasion?
Fourth day.
Fourth day.
D
And
plus 4.
those bodies had been in that water now for several days.
Yes.
Oh my.
And they never made it to the shores on Normandy. They were already inside. The troops were already inside, I think 3 miles before we went in. And
Now
so,
tell us again, so we'll have it clear on our tape, the name of the beach that you beached on there. Which part of the
Omaha.
Omaha Beach?
No.
It's a hideous time.
Oh yes, and there were lots of foxholes along there where the first wave had gone in and dug foxholes on the beach, and so we were to spend the first night right there. They said, dig some foxholes right here. Take care of yourself, because German planes would come over and stray. And so there were foxholes we got into that somebody else had dug and then moved on.
Yeah.
And so after we got our bearings of where we were, and we sort of dug foxholes, some of them long that you could lay down in, or one around that you squat down in. So I got them all ready. I went down the line to see that all the men had their foxholes dug. And about that time, a German came over strafing, and it sounded like a gun being fired in a stovepipe. Pow, pow, and you could tell it was what it was. And everybody was scattered for foxholes. I was too far down there. I couldn't get back to my foxhole because I was checking to see if everybody had one. And there's a long one here somebody dug. I just dived into that and just as I hit that foxhole, whoever it belonged to hanging right in on top of it. And he had lots of 4-letter words to say to me for being in his foxhole. and I turned and looked up where I could see him. It was Clovis Bryant from Van Buren.
Now that's a story.
We laughed about that, and he said, "Don't you ever do this again." I said, "Don't you ever talk to me about that like that again either." but you know,
How many men did you have responsibility for?
at that time I had about 40, and because we'd be working in shifts, we worked around the clock once we set up our tents as we moved inside. Right, but we moved in right behind the front lines, perhaps a mile. And lots of times they were shooting over us, you know, at the enemy out there. And as soon as somebody was wounded, they brought it right to us.
No.
Did he need to go to the operating room here? Or was he able to be taken on back, have an ambulance take him on back to a real hospital, let's say? We just